Hello, welcome to RajaReads. I'm Masood Raja and welcome to my channel where I introduce you to books from all around the world. And today I'll talk about another wonderful novel, this time from Africa, from Kenya, by Ngugi Thiong'O called Devil on the Cross. Now I do have a detailed lecture on it on my other channel, where I actually go through the novel scholastically in terms of how a student would read it, and you can obviously check it out. I'll post the link in the description. But here I'll just briefly introduce the novel to anyone who might be interested in reading a novel from Kenya. So I'll first briefly introduce the author and then talk about the plot of the novel and a couple of main characters, and then try to explain without giving you any spoilers as to who would be a good reader or good audience for the novel, who does the novel speak to. And I hope that would help you in picking up this book and reading it. So Ngugi Thiong'O is from Kenya, but he has traveled and taught all over the world, including the United States. And he's not just a novelist, he's also a playwright, and he also has published quite a few scholarly books, mostly about issues of African identity and African culture. Now, originally his name was James Ngugi, but in the mid-1970s, Ngugi decided that he was going to adopt a Gikuyu name instead of the Christian name that was given to him, and that is when he changes it to Ngugi wa Thiong'O. And in mid-1970s, Ngugi also decides that he will start writing in Gikuyu instead of writing in English. And that is a very important decision on his part, and he argues for this kind of writing in his book Decolonizing the Mind, which is a highly regarded book in postcolonial studies and in literary studies. And his argument was that a lot of these nations which were formerly colonized, especially in Africa, did not have their own written scripts, and because of that, they lose touch with their own historical roots and cultures. And hence it was the responsibility of their writers to produce literature in their own language. So Devil on the Cross was the first novel that Ngugi Thiong'O writes in Gikuyu first. And there is, of course, a story about it. He had previously written a play which was staged, and it was highly well received, but it was critical of the government of Kenya. So Ngugi was arrested, put in jail. He was never tried, but he was in jail for about a year. And a lot of people will tell you in a mythological lore of the novel that that is where he wrote the novel and then smuggled it out when he left jail. So the novel was originally published in Gikuyu, and it becomes a phenomenon because people start reading it. They start reading it over campfires. They start telling it as an oral tale. So in so many ways, it becomes this dream that Ngugi had, that if we produce stories in our own language, people will love it and it will help them recover and learn about their own culture. So that dream becomes true. Now, what the novel is about. So the main character of the novel, whom we meet on the very first pages, is Jacinta Waringa. She's our female protagonist. Mostly the novel carries her story and her life story. And then she meets quite a few people, a worker, a musician, people from different classes, while journeying back to her hometown, Ilmarak. As we read the novel, we realize that she is a sort of a persecuted woman, right? She has faced sexual aggression, workplace harassment, and she has no training to cope with these. So she quits and leaves, and on the journey back, she meets 4 people from different classes. And then the story is of how she, through solidarity with others, develops this autonomous self that can take a stand for itself, right? That is kind of the main theme for our main character. The title comes from a dream, a recurring dream that she has. And the dream is about people getting together and literally crucifying the devil. But the devil here is, in a three-piece suit. He's like a businessman. And then 3 days after the devil is crucified, his followers come back and pull him down, and he is resurrected. So that's where the title comes from. Now, Ngugi also uses a framing device. In the beginning of the story, he introduces us to the Gikandi player, who is the traditional narrative figure in Gikuyu folklore. And it's the Gikandi player who tells the story of Jacinta Waringa. And that framing is important because that gives Ngugi a distance from the critical work that he's doing, and that is criticizing the post-colonial Kenyan nation-state and its failure to take care of its own people. The novel is also a really interesting critique of global capitalism and its power brokers, the European nations or Americans, who in so many ways work through local elite, right, to create policies that benefit them and not necessarily the people themselves. So overall, it's a novel that gives us a very strong female lead character, but a female lead character who starts at the lowest point of her life and then emerges by the end of the novel as this almost a mythological figure. But it gives us that recovery not by just returning to family, but by developing lateral solidarities with other people. So recovery is social and political and not familial only. That's a very important distinction to make. And then the novel also gives us a critique of the policies and failures of the Kenyan nation state. How has it failed its own people? And a critique of global economic system which is still organized in terms of exploiting people and workers elsewhere in the developing world. That's roughly the novel. Now, who is it suitable for? So this is a literary novel. It's written for people who are curious, who are not afraid of reading experimental fiction, who are not afraid of reading a novel that is set in Kenya, in a particular part of Kenya, from Nairobi to the fictional city of Ilmorag. So any adventurous reader who is interested in reading a novel which will read differently compared to a traditional Western novel or a British novel, this novel will appeal to you. Now, any readers who are also interested in reading a story that uses a different narrative style, that uses different cultural allusions, has a background knowledge that you will have to develop, you will find this an interesting novel. So if you are that kind of a reader who doesn't bring a matrix or a judgment tool to say against which I'm going to measure this novel, if you are a reader who is open-minded and wants to experience not just a different story set in a different culture in a different country, but which also employs different vocabularies and narrative techniques, right, you will love this novel. But you have to be an adventurous reader, a reader who wants to take a risk or two to do that. Now, this is not a weekend read, so give yourself enough time to read it, right? But I can promise you that once you start reading it and once you get into the rhythm of the story, you will not be able to put it down. So that's all I have to say about The Devil on the Cross. I do hope you read it. And if you do, let me know what you think. And if you have any questions after you read it, feel free to post them here, and I'll be very happy to answer them. I would love to hear your views as well. I have taught this novel several times, and every time it's a different experience depending on who my students are and what level they are. So I would love to hear your views about it. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much for joining me in this journey about talking about books. I will now see you next time, and until then, as always, peace and love.